Good morning. We're going to give folks a minute to log on and then we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. We're just going to give folks another minute to log on and then we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Liza Fleming-Ives, Executive Director of the Genesis Fund and Chair of the MAHC Board, and I want to welcome you to our April membership meeting. We have over 120 participants joining the call today. And I just want to review, we're on the Zoom platform. So all participants are in listen-only mode and your videos will be turned off for the meeting. We don't use the chat feature, but we do welcome you to ask questions. And so if you would just go ahead, if you have questions, use the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and put questions in there and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible given the time that we have. So we are recording the meeting today and we'll make the link to the recording available to everyone by email. So thank you again for being here. We've got a full agenda today with a number of guests. We're going to provide an update on the state's rent relief program and other American Rescue Plan funds. We've got an update on the state legislative session and on 2 MAHC research projects going on right now. We'll also hear from staff at Pine Tree Legal Assistance about their work to prevent evictions and from Efficiency Maine about their electric vehicle initiatives. So I'm gonna go ahead and have Dan Brennan join us now and also Greg Payne, MAHC's director. And Dan, thanks for being with us this morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. We wanted to have you just begin by sharing an update on the relaunched state rent relief program and also get your thoughts on how other funds for housing in the most recent American Rescue Plan, like the Fed Home Funds, are going to be deployed in the state. So
great.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
It's good to see you, Liza and Greg, and thank you very much for inviting me in today. You know, it occurs to me that you know, we came off our 50-year celebration at Maine Housing before the pandemic, and looking ahead, we didn't realize that a year later we would probably be in one of the more historic times in our history, where we've got such an enormous amount of federal dollars flowing into our agency for the issue, you know, to address the issues of affordable housing. So it's really quite a monumental time. I'll talk today a little bit about where we are with the current rent relief program, and then I thought I would walk through what we're expecting from the American Rescue Plan, as you mentioned. So we started a month ago on the relaunch of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. These are from the $200 million that were delivered in the December stimulus package, and working with our community action agencies, we relaunched the program on March 1st. So we're about a month in now. And a lot of what we expected has occurred. To date, we've received over 8,700 applications. Now, some of those are duplicates, and we're working through trying to figure out exactly how many might be duplicate. But as of the end of the month, we had paid out or approved over 1,000 applications to the tune of $5.1 million. So about half of that money is approved and ready to go out in the next weekly payment cycle of the caps, and half that money has actually gone out to landlords. I'm not surprised by those numbers. I'm not surprised by the surge. We expected a huge surge of applications given that we were shut down in January and February as we waited for the federal guidance to come and put the program together. But if you look at $5.1 million over a little over 1,000 applications, $4,700 per application. That to me tells me we're soaking up a lot of arrearages, a lot of back paid rent that landlords have been waiting for, and helping people that have been most in need. We know that, so the surge came, we're not surprised, and now we're really working. The hard work is actually getting through each of the remaining applications. So we stay in touch on a regular basis with each of the 10 community action agencies that are processing the applications. We have not experienced any major technical glitches or any major problems. So now we're down into the weeds. We're down into working with the CAP agencies on a daily basis. How are you doing? What problems are you encountering? From an operational perspective, is this working? Much of what the capsule report is similar to what we knew in 2020. In order for an application to be successfully processed, there's a little bit more paperwork associated with this federal money than there was in the fall. So that we expect is going to take a little bit of time. But for the most part, once the puzzle pieces are together and we CAPS have what they need from the tenants and what they need from the landlords, then payment goes right out the door. So $5 million in the first month, knowing that it was going to be the startup month, has me encouraged that we've got this up off the ground. Now the goal is to keep the momentum going and continuing to process the thousands of applications that are out there. It's a tough job market. And despite the ability for CAP agencies to staff up, some markets are harder than others to find the talent and then train the folks. So that's a bit of an issue in some areas. In other areas, things are going just fine. So we are watching this very closely on a daily basis. We've got a great implementation team here at Maine Housing, and this is the beginning of a long-term run now. This rental assistance program is going to be with us for what I foresee is the next 4 years. And so we are increasing our public relations and marketing. We know that the first weeks of this, the press was very active. We've gotten a few press calls in the last week or so, and we've been running some public service announcements. And I know that you folks have been engaged with us and helping us. And so now the key is really to get this thing working as smoothly as we can, getting the word out, and continuing to help as many people as we can. One other, throughout the course of March is when we typically go to Washington and we meet with our congressional delegation. Obviously, we had to do that virtually. But in the last week and a half or so, I've had the opportunity to speak with all 4 members of our congressional delegation, report much the same to them that I have to you, and express sort of stepping back now, the concern about our ability to burn through the money in the time frame that the federal legislation has in place. And I think that is not only a case of an issue for Maine, a small state like Maine. We're small, we've got low rents, and we can't burn through the type of money that some states with some very high rents can. And I don't think that Maine should be penalized for that. I think that we work to help as many people as we can, as quickly as we can, but then recognize that we have greater housing needs as well. And I'll kind of jump now from the current program to the American Rescue Plan. So we get this program up and going, and then the American Rescue Plan gets passed. And a key component of the American Rescue Plan is another $152 million of rental assistance that is largely going to come right on top of the emergency rental assistance program. Now, there's some nuances to the new money. We call it ERA 2.0 versus ERA 1.0. First and foremost, we are still awaiting guidance from Treasury on how to request that money, what rules or differences that money may have than ERA 1.0. We know that Treasury is working on it. As you probably know, Treasury has been very transparent in their process. Access to folks like Noel Poyo at U.S. Treasury has been remarkable in my mind. But we know they're working hard, but we don't have any information yet on when that money will be coming to us and under how that blends in with the money we currently have. Again, that second pot, there are some features of it that are a little more attractive than ERA 1.0. That eligibility is slightly expanded to people who have been affected during the pandemic versus because of the pandemic. So we're looking to maximize that, but there are also some deadlines there that have me concerned about not wanting to have to lose any of this money back to the federal government. So those concerns have been shared with all 4 members of our congressional delegation, strategies about how to go about that. And it's going to take more than Maine. There are several other states that are impacted like we are. We're going to have to band together. We're going to have to work at the national level and try and keep this $352 million in Maine for the next 4 years, whether it be for rental assistance or, more importantly, for other housing needs that I think we need to address. The other features of the American Rescue Plan I'll talk about. One is the Housing Assistance Fund. Switching gears now, we're going to go off rental, we're going to go to homeowners. This is a $50 million pot to help homeowners in Maine who are struggling to pay their mortgage. I'm glad to see we've got Chet Randall with us. We had a great conversation with Chet recently. There's an existing network here in Maine of organizations that help homeowners. We're less familiar with that directly here at Maine Housing. We have our own portfolio. We help our borrowers, but we're going to work to connect in with this network of housing counseling agencies, some of who are CAP agencies, some who are other nonprofits in Maine, and you know who you are. And we're going to begin discussions over the next week or so, engage that group and come up with the best approach to deploy this $50 million when it comes. Again, we need U.S. Treasury to advise us when we can access the $50 million, how we can access it, what the rules are going to be. And the legislation left out a small thing about administrative fee money to deploy this money. So there's some money there's some work that needs to be done at the federal level on that. But in the meantime, I want to engage with the professionals in Maine that help homeowners pay their mortgages and see how Maine Housing can be the most effective conduit using partnerships with that group. Thirdly, okay, so we're getting a lot more housing vouchers, housing choice voucher money. That is going to be a huge help. The areas of concern I have with rental assistance vouchers in Maine is, as we all know, there's a huge waiting list. The waiting list is too long. When you get to the waiting list, you get a voucher, and it's really hard to find a unit. So we're going to be working here at Maine Housing, and then we're going to be engaging with the public housing directors. Actually, this morning, we're going to have a conversation with them about how collectively Maine Housing can deploy some resources to help all of us get people who have a voucher looking for housing get into a unit, whether that be through landlord incentives, through to attract more people to the program, to help repair and get units in shape so that they can receive voucher holders. We need to solve for that. Getting a big pot of voucher money is very, very helpful, but we need a place for people to go. We need landlords willing to rent to them. So that is very much of an action item in our pot. And lastly, under the American Rescue Plan, we've got about $16 million for homelessness that is going to flow to us through the Federal Home Fund. It's a little bit different approach that the federal government is taking. Historically, they would take the homeless money and use the Emergency Shelter Grant Program, which they've done and which we have been spending money throughout 2020. But now we're going to flow it through the Home Fund. And again, we'll have to wait for HUD to give us advice and guidance on when we can access that money and what we can use it for. But I think there's a real opportunity here, personally speaking, to invest in some infrastructure around buildings for nonprofits and shelter providers, to work with the statewide homeless council and the new approach we have towards homelessness, which is a more regional hub-based approach. we need to move away from these large congregate shelters and move more towards what we've been doing in 2020 by, kind of in crisis management, when we move to using hotels and using other places where people are spread out a little bit more, have a little bit more privacy. Well, maybe we can get some real estate in the hands of nonprofits and shelter providers to help provide either shelter or permanent supportive housing. And that might be, those are just my thoughts. We have a state legislature that's eyeing all this money as well. And we're looking forward to working with them. But a lot of planning, a lot of waiting and seeing from the federal government. But once we get the guidance and once we see a clear path, we'll be ready to move on all of these funds. So I think I will stop there and invite any questions that anybody may have.
Great, and thanks, Dan. I just want to remind folks, go ahead and put questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to those. And there's one already, Dan, just to go back to the rent relief program, and I know you have a detailed frequently asked questions list on your website about that, but one question that's come in is, does Maine allow the payments to renters if the landlord won't participate in the program?
The federal legislation allows for that, and therefore our program does allow for that. Our experience, and we've had a couple of them occur already, where we have some tension, if you will, between landlord and tenant, where the landlord might not be willing to receive the money. Part of the rental assistance program is a housing stability services approach, where we can take some of the snarly and more difficult situations, refer them out to either mediators or legal advisors to help resolve situations where a landlord that might not be willing. But once a landlord becomes aware that we will pay the tenant directly if the landlord is unwilling, that usually, at least in our cases we've had, has spurred some mediation and allowed someone to stay in the housing, which is the ultimate goal. But yes, the law allows for it, and our program would allow for that under the right circumstances.
Dan, you alluded earlier to the marketing program that you all are doing, which seems quite robust, including social media and earned media and some PSAs, which is great. And I'm just curious, for those who are on this call right now and who would like to help spread the word within their networks or put something on their social media, all to the point of trying to make sure that, people who need help with their rent can access this money if they're eligible. What should people do if they want to help spread the word?
What I would do is they can contact us here at Maine Housing. I've got a fantastic communications team that are so much more knowledgeable about the ways to go about these things than I am. But they can reach out to us here at Maine Housing. They can send me an email or anybody that they know here. We'll funnel it to the right people and take advantage of the help that you've just offered out, Greg. I think trying to get the information of this program out to as many people as possible is critical. And whatever means and methods we can, we will support that. So contact us here at Maine Housing, and we will be happy to work with you and provide you some guidance on that.
Okay, great.
Great. There's a question that's come in about increases in construction costs recently due to disruptions in supply chain, and the question is, as deals try to get done and to closing this spring and summer, have you considered addressing the cost per unit caps to adjust to these kinds of market conditions?
So the short answer is yes. Now the caps are a construct of a rule, right? And so that's more policy making, which kind of slogs along in its own official way. But there's also real life, and real life is what we are experiencing. The word that I've given to my team and to folks that I've talked to before when circumstances in the market occur outside of your control that are no fault of anybody's. That simply gets documented, and that should not be a barrier to a project going forward, regardless of construction cost caps. So I have the ability to waive the cap on certain cases. We might be entering situations like that. It doesn't mean that the hard questions will be asked about costs when those come, but we realize that lumber and other materials and labor are huge barriers right now. And so the short answer is if it's outside of your control, it's not going to be a barrier. Engage with the folks on my team on that. They know how I feel about it. And if case is warranted, then we won't hold the deal up because of a cap if real life circumstances are there. So.
Dan, you were talking about the kind of significant dollars for home ownership. I think 50 million coming to Maine, and I think encouraging people to reach out if they have expertise in that arena to talk about that. And also, you mentioned that the new Fed home money, significantly more than we usually get, and conversations that'll need to happen once Treasury issues its guidance about what to do with that exactly, because it is pretty flexible. It seems like it can be both capital and operating costs. And so I guess my question is, for people who want to take you up on that, either on the home ownership side or the Fed home side, who should they reach out to at Maine Housing to be part of those respective conversations?
To be honest with you, they can reach out directly to me, only because let me look at this in two different ways. First of all, with the Homeowner Assistance Fund, there is an existing group of housing counseling agencies in Maine that coordinate, help homeowners, and we'll be pulling, as we pull that group together in the next week to 10 days, we'll formalize ways to tap into that. We can either use your outreach or our outreach to let people know how that comes together. So that's the Homeowner Assistance Fund. There'll be a team put together to develop an approach on that. With regard to the home fund, if things go the way they normally do with the home fund, we'll be required to do formal outreach as part of our consolidated plan through HUD and update all of our documents. So there might be a slightly different approach taken there. In terms of just general questions, I mean, by all means, people can reach out to me, but we're still very much waiting for U.S. Treasury and HUD to guide us on what their expectations are going to be. So it might be a little bit different. Maybe a month from now, Greg, we'll have a little bit more information we can share on both of those.
Okay.
So Dan, thank you. We're out of time for this morning, but I think this conversation to be continued, and I will take you up on that. To have you back for our our next meeting to hear more and hear more about what's been determined, what's come from Treasury in terms of that guidance.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, take care.
Okay. We're going to shift now to an update on the state legislative session. And Greg, do you want to go ahead and start by sharing a few updates on specific legislation that MAHC has been working on this year?
Sure. Just very quick, I'll mention a couple things that we've been working on, and then Alicia from Bernstein Shore can give us sort of a more broader view of what's happening. Because if folks have been reading the paper, there's sort of a lot of weird dynamics happening this year that are having an impact, and all this federal money is having an impact too, and the conversation about bonds and the like. But I'm going to let Alicia handle that. I'll just mention to people that, a couple of the priorities we've been working on are moving forward. One is sort of a state match to the federal 4% floor, which passed back in December at the federal level. There was legislation needed at the state level to kind of conform to that so that we could make the most of our new state affordable housing tax credit program. And the House Speaker, who's been the champion of that program all along, worked with members of AFA and pushed that through. So that is in place now. And both the state and federal tax credits can get up to 4%. And that's incredibly helpful in funding more projects and creating more housing. One of our other priorities around a zoning and land use commission has cleared the Labor and Housing Committee unanimously. It took all of about 60 seconds for the committee to approve it without changes at their work session last week, which is great. And so that still, though, needs action at the House and Senate level and requires a little money like commissions typically do. So there's still some more steps on that one. And maybe I will stop there and ask Alicia to give us the broader view of what is an odd and interesting 2021 legislative session.
Sure thing. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, it has been an interesting whirlwind, all remotely, watching a lot of YouTube these days, which has been an interesting way to engage in this public process. Like you said, as many of you know, just from watching the news, they did pass an $8.4 billion biennial budget last week with a majority vote. Because they did it sooner than they normally would pass a biennial budget, they were able to do it without having to get a 2/3. So it'll go into effect, that 90 days after adjournment. They did technically adjourn, and we'll have that budget in place. As many of you probably know, it was what was seen as essentially a baseline budget with flat funding, with no major new programs or services, no big cuts to existing programs or services. And I think essentially the idea is that that budget will move forward. And a lot of the negotiations that had been happening as a part of the biennial budget process, the normal process with committees doing their work and giving report outs to the Appropriations Committee, those discussions and recommendations will likely show up in some sort of a supplemental budget. Part of what's interesting, again, about this year's process is that that supplemental budget, the way that we're looking at it, is that supplemental budget may not have to get 2/3 either if it's passed as a regular bill and not as an emergency. That might create some opportunities, but it also might create some more tension in the legislature between the parties, that I think could create some barriers for things like bonds, which inherently require 2/3, or if there's something with a constitutional amendment which inherently requires 2/3. Those things might be a bit more challenging. The Revenue Forecasting Committee in February revised the forecast up by 139 million, including 40 million for this fiscal year ending in June. Again, I think between that revenue forecast being more robust than we thought and the infusion of all this federal money, as Dan was saying, there's a lot of just discussions happening right now about how to utilize that money, how to utilize some of the one-time infusion of money to fund some things that they may have been funding through the general fund. And does that free up some of that general fund money to be able to use for more ongoing programs and services? So there just seems to be a lot of negotiating right now. There also seem to be looking a lot at the Economic Recovery Committee recommendations. That was a body that met. They had a lot of subgroups. They met for a long time and produced a pretty comprehensive report. They're looking back at that report, I think, for some guidance, as well as the Climate Action Plan, to take a look at what to make as some of the priorities. And the Office of Policy Innovation, which is where Hannah Pingree is leading that office, seems to be doing a lot of work of developing those recommendations. Again, the legislature, this is not money that the governor can just allocate on her own. She will have to go back to the legislature. That process is still a little bit up in the air. It's unclear whether they would just go through appropriations or whether they would allow the policy subcommittees to continue to do some individual work. In the meantime, we're at about 1,400 bills printed at this point. It's hard to say how many will still come because sometimes things kind of just fizzle out before they come out of the revisers or they get condensed with other proposals. But despite the fact that there was definitely some angst about whether committees would continue to kind of do their work as usual after the majority budget was passed last week, from what I've seen in public hearings and work sessions, the committees are continuing to just do their policy work and have public hearings and work sessions. It's a little bit business as usual, for lack of a better word.
Greg, you're muted.
So it sounds like, one hard thing right now is that, the two parties are struggling with each other, and you need the parties to come together to pass bonds generally, especially if a party doesn't have a supermajority. So, but in the absence of it looks more and more like bonds are going to have a hard slog. Any bond not named transportation probably is going to have a hard time winning enough votes. But the good news is that there is this influx of federal money coming in that is, I think we're still waiting from Treasury for Treasury to issue some more guidance about what can be done with those. But perhaps to some degree, some of that money can be used as a substitute for the bonds that are not going to likely happen. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely the way that we're looking at it, and that, it can either be used to fund the things that we would have tried to borrow to fund, and also things that may have had more legs even without all of this, the transportation, the broadband. My understanding is there's like $120 million coming to Maine for broadband alone. So what does that, if that had been a priority, what does that infusion of money free up for use on other things, including priorities of you all? And certainly, as Dan mentioned, there's a lot of the intention of the federal funds seems to be to address, the housing crisis pretty broadly. So there's, I think, a lot of what folks that are impacted by these issues are trying to figure out right now. And you asked Dan pretty directly, like, who are the people that we should be going to be making our case for how this money should be spent, of the best, most efficient, most way to be spending this money to get biggest bang for your buck, most long-term overall impact. Because I was talking to somebody that's working on some of this recently, and he was saying, federal stimulus works. The reason the economic forecast is much better than we had feared is in part because of the CARES Act money, because of the money that we know is coming in down the road. So I think it's up to all of us to use our voices to try to make sure that this incredible opportunity is utilized.
Great. Alicia, thanks for sharing this update, and also for looking out for MAHC's interest in this legislative session. Really
Sure.
appreciate it. Yeah. We're going to shift now to an update on two research projects that MAHC has been working on in this last year related to COVID. One is a monthly interview project, which we've shared many summaries about throughout the year, looking at the experience of working renter households. And then the other is creation of a database of key information about thousands of eviction cases that have been filed in the Maine courts. And so we've got Adam Cohen, who's been working on the eviction database for us, and Effie Rourke working on those tenant interviews. And welcome to you both. Thank you for the work that you're doing this year. And Effie, why don't we have you go first and just share an update on the interview project and where we are right now.
Sure, thanks so much for having me. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So as Liza mentioned, we've been sharing some news about this interview project for a while, but just a quick overview. We're really looking to find out how tenants are faring throughout the pandemic. And then we're sharing our results from these interviews each month with policymakers, the press, national advocates. We've done quite a bit of technical assistance with groups like MAHC in other states who are interested in doing similar projects. We started last summer and we're going through this summer. We're averaging interviews with about 60 to 75 of the same households each month. They are thankfully receiving a little bit of compensation for their participation in the project. Hannaford donated quite a few $10 gift cards to us. So each month people get a gift card if they participate. And then you can see here we have representation from all across Maine, from Portland and other more urban communities to very rural. Notably absent is Augusta, and we included that because if anybody wants to send us some potential tenants in Augusta, we would love to add them even this late in the project. A quick thank you to all of the property management companies that helped with recruitment and identifying tenants on the front end of this project. We couldn't obviously have done this without you, so thank you for being willing to connect us with your tenants and residents back last summer or early in the fall. So the rest of this, I want to focus really on what our findings have been so far. We found that mostly households are reporting lower income than they had before the pandemic, although you can see that it's getting slightly better. With this most recent month, only about 60% of households reported that their income was lower, whereas at the beginning of the project, it was closer to 75%. Over time, we've seen households are reporting that they're paying their rent. And I think that Greg has talked about this at length, that rent receipts reflect that. It is getting a little bit lower over time. So this most recent March summary, only 84% of participants reported that they had paid their February rent in full. So you can see this is sort of trending downward over time. We spend a lot of time asking about kind of diving in, like, how are you paying your rent? With what money? What other trade-offs might households be making in order to make sure that they're staying housed? Throughout the whole project, skipping bills has been something that's emerged as a strategy for many families. Skipping electricity, skipping internet, skipping car insurance, anything that they can kind of, you know, skim off or juggle one from month to month to make sure that their rent is paid. Although luckily, fortunately, this is trending downward over time. So in our most recent survey, only 28% of households reported that they had skipped bills in the month prior to the survey. But that definitely has emerged as a strategy for households to manage their budgets and make ends meet. And then we also did a deep dive into household savings as well as household credit card and debt usage as another strategy to manage household finances and make sure rent is paid. So looking at the impact of pandemic on household savings, 64% of our households have reported that their savings are either totally gone or significantly depleted. This does not include a portion of households who report that they didn't have savings to start with, but of those who did have savings, this is, you know, this bar over here in red is really a red flag that whatever resources people had in savings, that those are largely gone at this point. And then same thing for credit cards. A lot of households, besides skipping bills or draining savings, a lot of folks have been reporting that they shift expenses from, they're shifting a lot of expenses where possible onto credit cards in order to free up other finances. So you can see here, 46% are reporting increased credit card debt during the pandemic, or that they're relying on credit cards more than they normally would. And then I wanted to just pull out a few of the larger themes that we've seen across time, as well as include some of the quotes from people from the most recent surveys that we did in March. So again, people are largely paying their rent, but they are doing it with all kinds of different strategies, some of which are going to have long-term negative impacts. They're cobbling together credit card debt, skipping bills, cutting back, just whatever they can do to piece together their rent each month. This is a quote that I hear all the time, that people pay lots of things with their credit cards and then they pay the minimum on their credit card, and that's sort of how they're getting by. Also, lots of folks report skipping their electricity bills, and the belief, either real or perceived, that that their electricity can't be shut off because of the pandemic. Another big theme is, just as Dan mentioned, instability in the labor market. even the people in our project who are working and have been working throughout, many of them, for instance, their hours have been cut significantly. Their ability to get overtime has been cut. You know, they've been kind of in and out of work, or they've been completely without work. So even the folks though who've been working the whole time have seen decreases in their income. I'll give you just a moment here to read this quote from one of our participants. Regarding the rental assistance program, people are applying for that program, and many people are starting to see payments come through, but there's still a lot of both confusion and frustration from the application processes in the fall and late winter. And then that piece of the income stability. So a lot of folks in our project have hours that shift from week to week. And so, you know, they have to provide pay stubs or show their income, but their income changes so much that it's kind of difficult for them to provide some of the documentation that's needed. And it's not just rental assistance. People are reporting the same type of thing if they receive unemployment or if they receive SNAP. Just the up and down hours and up and down in their income makes it really difficult for them to have any kind of consistency. And then last but not least, parents remain especially stressed. Many parents have had to quit their jobs in order to stay home with their kids or do remote schooling. And so, you know, they are just having especially hard time, or they have kids at home. One family that I talk to regularly has teenagers at home. We all know that teenagers like to eat a lot. And so at the same time that they're having to have a loss of income, they're also having increased expenses from having their kids home all the time. And then just a few last quotes before I turn it over to Adam. And this is, again, just reflecting that the parents especially are feeling stressed as they have increased expenses from having their children home, or having to juggle remote school and try to make ends meet. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Adam.
Thanks, Effie. Adam.
Hi, everyone. So I've been working with Greg and Effie since, I guess it was probably about late May now, on the counterpart to the tenant interview project, which is MAHC's eviction tracking database. And so I'm just going to quickly kind of go over that project and some of the key findings that's come from it so far. I'm going to be kind of moving through it quickly and don't want to spend too much time this morning. So I just wanted to quickly point out, I'm sure many of you have seen the reports that have come out of the work that Greg has shared. But just on the MAHC website, under the advocacy section, you can find the full reports. And I think I've been working with Greg. I think we're going to be doing some website updates now to include some more information on here, but I just wanted to sort of point out where you can find it going forward. All right. So to start with a quick overview. So, you know, this project really came about, you know, during the beginning of the pandemic. You know, I think a lot of news outlets across the country were reporting, you know, a perceived eviction crisis or looming eviction wave in the months ahead. And, you know, one thing that we were sort of struggling with is how do you define an eviction crisis, and what does that actually mean? You know, there was very little data available on eviction filings, and that's true in many places across the country, but I think in Maine it was especially true because we still kind of have a paper-based court filing system, so it makes it really hard to collect good data. The Maine Judicial Branch does publish at the end of each year an annual count of FED filings in each of the judicial regions throughout Maine, but you know, I think FED filings encompass more than just residential evictions, so it's hard to kind of get a sense of how many of those are actually residential evictions. And also, you know, by the point that they're producing the annual numbers, the year's over and it's hard to sort of detect whether there is an eviction problem going on or a huge increase in evictions until you're maybe 12 months down the road. So the data points that we have been collecting on eviction cases, and you'll see at the bottom where we've collected about we've collected data on about 2,400 eviction files filed between August 2019 and December 2020. And the purpose of kind of starting with some courts back in August 2019 and in all of the courts starting in January 2020 was develop sort of a baseline of you know, what do evictions look like in Maine in a typical year prior to the pandemic. So the data points we've been collecting, background info on kind of the cases, the reason for the eviction, and this is something that, again, just producing FED files or filing numbers doesn't get you to, and I think it's, as we'll see, it's pretty telling. The arrearages in the case that the eviction was filed for the non-payment of rent, what the final judgment entered in the eviction cases. It's a little bit different than outcomes because we don't actually know. Sometimes a final judgment is entered, but maybe the tenant doesn't necessarily leave because they kind of enter into an arrangement with the landlord following the eviction judgment. And then the last one is whether the parties had legal representation. So I just wanted to share this chart quickly just to show which courts we've been focusing on. We originally focused on Maine has 29 district courts throughout the state where evictions are filed. We started by looking at all the courts in 6 of Maine's 16 counties, and those 6 counties represent where 75% of Maine's renter population lives. Following the summer, just sort of as a resource kind of limitation barrier, considering you have to physically drive to each of the courthouses and go in person to request the files, we decided to focus on just the 7 busiest eviction courts in those 6 counties. And so these are the district courts that most of the data that I'll be showing you come from.
And Adam, I'm sorry, but we kind of have to go. We have a 2-minute warning here before we have to move forward. So if you can
Gotcha.
do
Okay.
rapid fire, that'd be great.
So, you know, I think as the paper goes over, these are just sort of the biggest kind of takeaways we have. The first one being that eviction filings have decreased significantly during the pandemic. And, you know, I think there's many reasons for that, but the probably biggest one has to do with the court closures and the different protections that have been issued. The stated causes of eviction filings have shifted during the pandemic. So you'll see less cases filed for the non-payment of rent and more filed for other causes. And again, I think that is probably heavily influenced by some of the different eviction moratoriums. In terms of arrearages alleged by the landlord in eviction filings have gone up. And I think, you know, that makes sense, both given what we've learned through Effie's project and that a lot of tenants are struggling. And also just in that cases are taking a lot longer before they get to and through court. And so the amount of arrearages when the landlord files may be a lot higher. Next, the eviction case outcomes shifted during the pandemic as more cases were dismissed. And I think that this is primarily a result of changes in court procedure. There's now a telephonic status conference before the hearing and more cases going to mediation. There's also just a longer period of time before you know, a tenant who has an eviction filed against them actually has to appear in court. And maybe that longer period of time is giving them more time to find new places to live. And so they're moving out before the hearing. And then finally, which I think Chet's gonna speak more about next, is that tenants continue to lag behind landlords in legal representation. And as you can see, that's true in all the courts we're looking at, and it's pretty significant. And the outcomes of tenants who have legal representation in those courts are, you know, it's vastly different. I think tenants are 85% more likely to avoid an eviction judgment if they have representation. And finally, you know, I think this is kind of our next steps in the work. You'll be hearing about some of this in the months going forward. One project we're working on now is we've mapped all the eviction filings across Maine over the course of 2020. And what that's going to allow us to do is to look at all the census tracts where there are disparately high numbers of eviction filings, and be able to see kind of what are the underlying racial, health, housing characteristics of those places. And we're working on some various policy implications that have come out of the work. And again, I think you'll probably hear more about those from Greg moving forward. One of which that we're focusing on, though, is this issue of tenant representation. And so I think that is what Chet is going to speak to a little bit next.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'm going to invite Chet to share his video now and join us. And Chet, thank you so much. Chet is the Deputy Director at Pine Tree Legal Assistance. And we just have a few minutes today, but we just wanted you to share a quick overview of the work that you're doing to help people avoid eviction.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And Adam, thank you for that work, particularly the presentation regarding the evictions situation now. You really hit some of the highlights that I think are really important for us to understand. The one thing I do want to point out is the evictions currently that we're seeing in our cases are, well, a couple of things I want to touch on really quickly. And I'm sorry to seem rushed, but we've got to move on. I know is some of the things that have really helped with the resolution. I want to highlight that Adam talked about in our experience in eviction prevention has been the current structure that the court has used to manage the emergency pandemic, and that has been sort of a 3-point process. Begins with a status conference, it goes to mediation, and then at a later date there's a final hearing, and that has been a real sea change for us in how evictions typically happen. It's important to know that evictions used to happen. All of that would happen on one day, and it usually meant it was not a meaningful opportunity at mediating and resolving cases before you ended up in front of a judge, which I think is a stark distinction between where we were, where we are now, and Adam's data suggests strongly why it's an important change that we've experienced. Pine Tree is able to manage only about, our data is very similar to what Adam displayed. We're managing about 30%, 36% of those eviction cases that are filed. But we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of people who are seeking and needing legal assistance that we've been unable to meet. And I'll give you an example. In 2019, we assisted, I got the data here, about 1,900 cases in all of 2019. In the first quarter of this year, we've been in touch with and had contact with over 800 family households who are tenants, which has been a dramatic increase in demand for legal assistance. And one of the things I want to highlight for that the data also suggests is that the higher concentrations of legal services that we're able to provide, as you can imagine, because of the efficiencies, are those that are in the larger population centers. And so we have big swaths of the state that are rural courts. As Adam pointed out, there are 29 of them around the state, and our limited staff really don't have the ability to get to those courts on a consistent, regular basis to serve the tenant communities in those areas, which is a real concern for us, in part because some of the highest concentrations of poverty are in those rural courts. And so it's a particular area of concern and an area that we've been trying to focus on to the best of our abilities. It comes down to the limited resources that we have. Adam talked about the difference between landlord representation, tenant representation is a direct correlation to available resources. And our ability, on average, we have about one full-time staff person working on eviction prevention in each of our 5 offices, which are in Portland, Augusta, Lewiston, Bangor, Presque Isle, Machias. Some of those offices, Portland and Lewiston, have more than one full-time employee working on eviction prevention. The point being, though, is that the available resources for tenants is very, very limited. And here's the other reality: is the data that you've all talked about, that Dan Brennan talked about, and others, that our tenant households are becoming even poorer as the pandemic carries on, making access to any kind of resources to assist themselves, particularly legal resource, even scarcer, so that there's a greater and greater need for legal services to try to help those tenants. I do want to touch on quickly a couple of myths. The CDC moratorium on evictions, as you can see from the data, doesn't mean that evictions have stopped at all. and it has not provided a ban to landlords bringing actions against tenants. And often what we're seeing is landlords are seeing reduced vacancy rates, increased rent opportunities or collection opportunities. And as a result of that, tenants are finding it harder to relocate, but also we are seeing a larger number of evictions being brought, notwithstanding the fact tenants owe money for reasons unrelated to money, because landlords seem to be wanting to get those units emptied and back on the market at a higher rate. That's something I'm speculating, but it really does seem to be a trend in the cases that we're seeing. I do want to just point out quickly also that there is some federal money coming, and we're hopeful that those dollars will have the opportunity to increase the ability of legal services to work with tenants. The problem we're seeing and the data that we're worried about are the restrictions on eligibility for that those services, both housing counseling as well as legal services, once we get to that point. And that I wanted to touch on because there's been conversations that I've been involved in when people have said, well, you're going to get all this money, or there's going to be all this money thrown at tenants. And it's really, while there's a lot of money that may come in for rental assistance, it's really tied to some very narrow eligibility criteria. And for legal services and housing stability services in particular, that's going to have a dramatic impact on those households that we can reach that Adams identified in that study. That is a very rushed overview of where we're at. But I also want to share for those who are here, we have tried to streamline our intake system. We have a much more robust call center program, and our wait times on our queues for the call center are minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So look at our website. The hours are for a call center, and the tenant's ability to access us is there. And I urge you, if you have communities you're working with or know of or communicating about legal services or rental assistance or other programs, be sure to drive them to or steer them towards our call center so we get as much information out as possible. I hope I didn't talk too fast. Sorry about that.
Thanks. No, that's great, Chet. Thank you so much for sharing that. And sorry to, have more limited time today, but really appreciate your sharing that summary. So,
and thank you all for the great work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chet.
In our final minutes here, we're gonna have folks join us from Efficiency Maine, Anastasia Hediger and Molly Siegel. Are gonna share just briefly about their electric vehicle initiatives and their work to expand the availability of electric vehicle charging infrastructure and the adoption of electric vehicles in Maine. So welcome, Molly and Anastasia.
Thanks, Liza.
So much. Yeah.
I think we're gonna skip the poll question just because we're totally running out of time.
Okay.
But as Liza mentioned, we're from Efficiency Maine, and we're just going to give you a quick overview of our incentive programs for electric vehicles and charging infrastructure and try to gauge interest in some continuing conversations about this subject. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll try to answer them. And then if you're interested in following up for more information, you can follow up with Greg afterwards or with one of us. All right. So as I mentioned, Efficiency Maine offers incentives for electric vehicles and chargers. Just really quickly, we have enhanced incentives for low-income customers, up to $5,500 for a full battery electric vehicle or $4,000 for a plug-in hybrid. We also recently started offering rebates on used electric vehicles, so that might be of interest to some low-income customers. This is through a pre-approval process. They have to be eligible and participating in HEAP fuel assistance to receive these rebates, and customers can apply through our website. So that's our low-income EV initiatives. And also I wanted to share this because a number of the organizations on this call might be eligible for governmental entity rebates or for our select nonprofit rebates, which is for nonprofits that are listed in the 211 Maine directory and have 501c3 status. So for governmental entities, which includes housing authorities, you can get up to $12,000 on a new battery electric vehicle or $5,000 on a plug-in hybrid. This is all available on our website if you navigate to the electric vehicle rebate page. We have a couple of opportunities for electric vehicle charging. We have a mail-in rebate if you're a governmental entity or a nonprofit that purchases an EV. We'll be releasing a level 2 charger RFP soon, which can be a good fit for public chargers. And there's also a federal tax credit if you install electric vehicle charging equipment through December 31st. That's 30% of the cost, up to $30,000 if it's for commercial use. So that was a super quick overview of our incentives for vehicles and chargers, and you can visit our website for more in-depth information. Anastasia?
Sure. I just wanted to highlight, if you go forward a couple slides, an example of a multi-unit project that we recently provided grants to. This is not an affordable housing development, but it's kind of a multi-use retail, hotel, condo, parking garage that is a new construction project, which is a great opportunity to install EV charging infrastructure, whether it's just the make-ready sort of conduit to prepare for EV chargers in the future, or to actually get started by installing some chargers for tenants or public use. And this image on the left kind of gives you an overview of what the second level will look like. And as you can see, there are level 2 chargers planned for that whole row of parking spots. And I just thought it would be a good illustration to show just how many dwelling units are in this development and how many charging plugs they chose to allocate up front. And I know that they did some future proofing to actually allow for the capacity of more chargers later. And as of right now, that's 17 charging plugs in the whole 2-story garage out of a total of 135 plugs. And it's a combination of dual ports, so 2 plugs for one station, and a single port charger that's up on the wall of the garage. And at the bottom, I wanted to give the high level cost breakdown of what this broke out to. And it's a total of 17 plugs. So this is a project that we recently worked with, and is a good example. We haven't seen a lot of participation from multi-unit dwelling projects yet, and it's a high priority for us moving forward as we receive more funding for chargers. So this affordable housing and a multi-family segment of the market is going to be a high priority for us moving forward, and it's we'll have hopefully incentive opportunities in the future. So I want to stop there. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah,
but
thank you both very much for sharing this. And we are out of time today. I want to just let folks know again, Molly and Anastasia have offered, please follow up with them directly if you have interest in learning more and connecting to the work that they're doing, or to reach out to Greg to make the connection. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thanks to all of our panelists today for a really full meeting and great information. And we appreciate folks hanging on for a few extra minutes here as we wrap up. So thanks for being with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will make a link to the recording of this meeting available to folks by email. And we look forward to seeing you at our next mock meeting later in the spring. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Goodbye.